I entered my husband's office to assume he'd be pleased with lunch only to see him enveloped in a kiss with another woman. When I accused him, she lunged at me and kicked my 8-month pregnant stomach. My husband found it amusing. Just then the door flung open and their expression changed. What if the man who cried tears of joy over your pregnancy, the one who promised you forever, was actually meticulously planning to ensure you and your baby never saw the light of day? That's not a nightmare, it's my reality. And it began in the most innocent way possible, with a simple turkey sandwich, destined for a monster. I remember it so clearly. My hands rested protectively over my incredibly round, 8-month pregnant belly, a little bubble of life and hope. I was navigating the familiar, sterile corridors of Metropolitan General Hospital, carrying a thermal bag. Inside, George's absolute favorite sandwich, turkey and Swiss on sourdough with that ridiculously expensive mustard he loved. You know, the kind of small gesture you make when you're just overflowing with love for someone. Earlier that crisp September morning, the smell of impending rain had drifted through our bedroom window. Before leaving for his shift, George had pressed a tender kiss to my forehead, whispering, "Take care of our little miracle." Our little miracle. Those words, drenched in what I thought was genuine affection, still echoed, a warm, fuzzy feeling wrapping around my heart as I approached his office. For 3 long, heartbreaking years, we tried to have a baby, enduring countless disappointments and 2 devastating miscarriages. When we finally saw those 2 pink lines, George, he actually cried. I mean, real, genuine tears, holding me tight in our kitchen as sunlight streamed in. It felt like a dream. We had a future. I'd even started practicing my name, Dr. Violet Lewis, I'd whisper to myself, imagining my future doctorate. I was only 6 months away from defending my psychology dissertation, and George. Oh, he was already planning our entire life. The house, the weekend barbecues, teaching our daughter to ride a bike. Everything felt so perfectly, beautifully laid out. I pushed open the door to the cardiology wing. My swollen ankles, a familiar pregnancy ache, protested with every step. The afternoon shift was a whirlwind, nurses hustling, monitors beeping their steady rhythm. George's office was at the very end, and I could see his nameplate, Dr. George Lewis, Cardiology, gleaming under those harsh fluorescent lights. My heart, it just swelled with pride. We'd met when I was just an undergrad volunteer. He was already a resident, so confident, so charming. His dark eyes, they seemed to look right through me, like he saw my soul. You're going to change the world, Violet, he'd told me on our 3rd date, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. And I want to be right there beside you when you do. God, I believed him. I really did. I knocked softly on his door, expecting his warm, familiar voice to call out, "Come in." Instead, silence. Then, a strange, muffled shuffling sound. My first thought was, maybe he's with a patient. But I checked my watch, 2:15 p.m. His schedule clearly showed he should be free. I turned the handle. I stepped inside. The thermal bag, with George's favorite sandwich, slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, hitting the floor with a pathetic, dull thud. My eyes were instantly drawn to the scene unfolding. George. My George. He was pressed against his desk, his white coat half open, his hands, tangled in the auburn hair of a woman whose face was sickeningly familiar. Stacy Ryder. The new nursing supervisor. The one who always found an excuse to interrupt our lunch in the cafeteria. The one who'd smiled and complimented my pregnancy glow, but whose eyes were always cold as winter, devoid of any genuine warmth. They were kissing. Desperately. Hungrily. Her legs were wrapped around his waist, medical charts scattered beneath them like discarded secrets. And his hands, those hands that had so gently caressed my pregnant belly just this morning, were now roaming her body with a sickening familiarity. This wasn't some awkward, fumbled mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a practiced, intimate routine. Time, it just suspended itself. My breath caught in my throat, each beat of my heart a painful, thunderous drum. I watched my husband's hands, the hands that had held me through miscarriages, that had dried my tears, that had cradled our miracle baby bump, now exploring another woman's body with passionate expertise. I watched Stacy's fingers work urgently at his belt buckle. And in that horrifying span of maybe 30 seconds, I watched my entire world, the beautiful, perfect future I just envisioned, shatter into a million irreparable pieces. A sound, raw and broken, ripped from my throat, part gasp, part guttural sob. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, but there was nothing innocent about this. George's face drained white, then flushed a furious, ugly red. Stacy, though. She just calmly smoothed her uniform. Her lipstick was smeared, her hair a disheveled mess, but her eyes, they glowed with a truly malicious satisfaction. Violet, George stammered, his voice cracking, pathetic. Don't, I managed to whisper, barely. My legs felt like liquid. I tried to take a step back, but I was frozen. Don't you dare say my name. Stacy actually laughed. A light, amused sound, as if she'd been caught sneaking cookies before dinner, not demolishing my entire existence. She hopped off the desk, straightened her skirt, and chirped, well, this is awkward. George shot her a warning look, a desperate plea in his eyes, but she just ignored him, her gaze fixed on me with a chilling, predatory intensity. You know, Violet, I've been waiting for this moment. It's been absolutely exhausting pretending to be nice to you at all these hospital functions. Stacy, stop. George finally said, but his voice, it just utterly lacked conviction. Stacy turned back to him, a smirk on her lips. Stop what, darling? She moved closer, her hand trailing across his chest with sickening, possessive familiarity. Stop telling your wife the truth. That you haven't loved her in years. That you only stayed because you felt sorry for her after the miscarriages. Each word was a sharp, twisted knife, sliding deeper and deeper between my ribs. That's not true, I managed to choke out, but my voice, it sounded foreign, weak, even to my own ears. And George? His silence was deafening. It was an answer in itself. Oh, honey, Stacy purred, her voice dripping with the fakest sympathy imaginable. Did you really think a man like George would be satisfied with someone like you? I mean, look at yourself. Swollen. Waddling around like a cow. When's the last time you even saw your own feet? George. I pleaded, my voice shattering. Tell her to stop. Tell her she's lying. He finally looked at me then. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't hatred. Wasn't anger, it was worse. It was pity. Cold, dismissive pity. Violet, we need to talk, he mumbled. But not here. Not like this. Not like this. Something wild and desperate clawed at my chest, threatening to rip its way out. Not like what, George? Not like finding my husband with his tongue down another woman's throat in his office. Not like discovering that my entire marriage is a lie, a cruel joke, while I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. Our child, he corrected quietly, almost as if he was trying to assert some ownership. Stacy's laugh was sharp, like breaking glass. Is it, though, George? Didn't you tell me all about those business trips she took during her fertile windows? All those psychology conferences. The implication hit me like a physical blow. My hands instinctively flew to my belly, shielding my baby. How dare you? I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I barely recognized. How dare either of you question? Oh, please, Stacy interrupted, taking a step closer, her voice laced with mock boredom. The grieving wife act is getting old, Violet. George and I. We've been together for 8 months. 8 months? My mind reeled. 8 months. The same age as my pregnancy. They'd started their affair, right after I'd gotten pregnant. Right after George had cried those fake tears of joy in our kitchen. In that instant, something inside me snapped. A cold, hard certainty replaced the shock and despair. Get away from my husband. I heard myself say, my voice, miraculously, gaining a new, unfamiliar strength. Stacy's eyes glittered with pure malice. Your husband. She scoffed. Honey, he hasn't been your husband in any way that matters for a very long time. Trust me, I would know. She moved even closer, and I was assaulted by the cloying, expensive scent of her perfume. The same scent I'd noticed on George's clothes for months, the one I'd dismissed as just another hospital odor. The blind loyalty I had, the way I refused to see what was right in front of me, now felt like a punch to the gut. In fact, Stacy continued, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper meant only for my ears, he was with me the night you went into false labor last month. Remember how he said he was just stuck at the hospital? She didn't stop. She just smiled, a cold, calculated expression that twisted her otherwise pretty features into something truly ugly and cruel. You want to know what he really says about you, Violet? How he complains about your neediness, your constant crying over every little thing. How he wishes he'd never married you. Stacy, enough. George finally choked out, a pitiful sound. But he still hadn't moved. Not an inch towards me. He just stood there, a pathetic spectator to his own life, watching his 8 months pregnant wife being verbally eviscerated by his mistress. No, George, Stacy insisted, her voice rising, shrill and triumphant. She deserves to know the truth. She deserves to know you've been planning to leave her right after the baby comes, that we've already looked at apartments together, that you've been lying to her face every single day while she waddles around playing happy housewife. The room began to spin, the fluorescent lights blurring into a sickly halo around her cruel face. I reached for the door frame, desperately needing to steady myself, to escape. But Stacy, ever the predator, was suddenly there, blocking my path, her body a sneering barrier. Where are you going, Violet? Running away. That's what you do, isn't it? Run away from difficult conversations. No wonder George needed a real woman. Move, I commanded, my voice barely controlled, a fragile thread holding my sanity together. Make me, she shot back, her smile widening. The words hung in the air, a chilling challenge. I looked past her, directly at George. Silently, I pleaded with him. Begged him. To intervene, to defend me, to show even a single remnant of the man who had once promised to love and protect me. But he just stood there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. Nothing. No movement. No word. Move. I repeated, my voice now stronger, infused with a sudden surge of adrenaline. Stacy's smile didn't falter. Or what? You'll call your uncle. Run crying to Director Stenson about how I'm being mean to you. My blood ran to ice. Uncle Elliot. He'd gotten me that volunteer position that led to meeting George in the first place. He'd walked me down the aisle at our wedding when my own father couldn't be there. But I had never used his position for special treatment. I rarely even mentioned our relationship to most people. That's right, Stacy continued, seeing the shock bloom on my face. We know all about your little family connections. It's amazing what pillow talk can reveal, isn't it, George? George finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. Stacy, you're going too far. His voice was weak, but it was something. Am I? She whirled around to face him, her hair whipping dramatically around her face. Am I going too far, or am I finally being honest? This woman, she gestured wildly at me, has been living in a fantasy for 2 years, George. Someone needs to wake her up. Then she turned back to me. Her face, inches from mine, was a mask of pure contempt. Your husband doesn't love you. Your marriage is over. And frankly, looking at you now, I can't blame him for wanting something better. That's when I made my mistake. A primal instinct, a desperate need to escape her toxic presence, took over. I tried to push past her. Stacy's hands shot out, shoving me backward with surprising, vicious force. My pregnant body, already so off balance, stumbled. I flailed, reaching for anything at all to steady myself. But there was nothing. Just air. I hit the ground hard, landing squarely on my side, my hands instinctively flying to cover my belly, to protect my baby. Pain exploded through my hip and shoulder. But that was nothing. Nothing compared to the sheer, gut-wrenching agony of what happened next. Stacy stood over me, her face a grotesque mask of rage and satisfaction. Stay down, she hissed, her voice a serpent's whisper. Stay down where you belong. And then, in a moment that would forever replay in my nightmares, a moment that would haunt my waking hours for months to come, she drew back her foot. And she kicked me. Directly. In my pregnant belly. The pain. Oh God, the pain. It was indescribable. Not just physical, though that was excruciating, a searing hot brand. But emotional. Spiritual. A violation so complete, so utterly soul-destroying, that it felt like something fundamental inside me had just been ripped apart. I curled around my unborn child, gasping for air, choking on my own anguish, as Stacy, the monster, raised her foot again. Stop. The voice that cut through the horrifying silence wasn't George's. It was deeper. More authoritative. Infused with a terrifying fury. What the hell is going on here? Uncle Elliot. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of absolute, incandescent rage. Behind him, two nurses peered in, their expressions a mix of shock and horror. The color drained from Stacy's face as she realized exactly who had witnessed her monstrous assault. Director Stenson, she stammered, backing away from me, her voice suddenly small and terrified. I can explain. Explain this. Uncle Elliot was across the room in 3 furious strides, dropping to his knees beside me. His hands were gentle, but urgent, as he checked my pulse, his eyes frantically scanning my body for injuries. Someone call 911. No, Uncle Elliot, I gasped, trying to push myself up, fear for my baby overriding the pain. The baby, don't move, sweetheart. Just breathe. Help is coming. His voice was calm, professional, but I could see the storm, a truly terrifying one, brewing in his eyes as he finally looked up at George and Stacy. George, for his part, finally seemed to grasp the terrifying gravity of the situation. Violet, I'm sorry. I didn't know she would. Shut up, Uncle Elliot snarled, his voice so cold it could freeze blood. Don't say another word. Either of you. As sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with agonizing speed, I felt something warm and wet between my legs. My water had broken. No, it was too early. 8 months was too early. The baby's coming, I whispered, terror abruptly replacing the white-hot rage as fierce, searing contractions began to tear through me. Uncle Elliot squeezed my hand, his grip a lifeline. We're going to take care of you, Violet. You and the baby. Everything's going to be all right. But even as he said the words, I could see the profound worry in his eyes. And in that moment, as paramedics burst through the door, their urgent movements a blur around me, as George stood frozen, a statue of cowardice against the wall, and Stacy cowered in the corner like the pathetic creature she was. I made a silent promise to my unborn daughter. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had no idea who they were messing with. The delivery room at Metropolitan General had seen thousands of births, but I guarantee, none quite like mine. As my daughter fought her way into the world 8 weeks early, weighing barely 4 pounds, I felt something else being born alongside her. A cold, calculating fury that settled into my bones like winter frost. I named her Mabel, after my grandmother, a woman who'd survived the Great Depression through sheer, unbending determination. Mabel was whisked away to the NICU before I could even hold her properly. But in that brief moment our eyes met, I saw it, something fierce. Something unbreakable. She was a fighter. Just like the women in our family. She's going to be fine, Dr. Beckham assured me as they prepped Mabel for intensive care. Small, but strong. Her lungs are developed enough, all her vital signs are stable. Uncle Elliot squeezed my hand as they wheeled me to recovery. His silver hair was disheveled, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, but his grip was steady and warm. I've been in contact with our legal department, he said quietly, his jaw set. And I've suspended both George and Miss Ryder pending a full investigation. Suspended? My voice, medication hazed, sounded impossibly far away. Violet, what happened today, what I witnessed, that was assault against a pregnant woman in my hospital. His jaw was set in a way I remembered from childhood, when he'd faced down bullies picking on me at family gatherings. This isn't just a personal matter anymore. Through the haze of exhaustion and pain meds, I heard voices in the hallway. George's voice, pleading with someone. Then Stacy's, higher-pitched, defensive. Uncle Elliot stood and walked to the door, his movements deliberate, controlled. If either of you comes within 50 feet of my niece or her daughter, I'll have hospital security remove you permanently, he said, his voice carrying clearly down the corridor. Consider this your only warning. Elliot, please, George's voice cracked. I need to see her. I need to explain. You need to get yourself a lawyer, Dr. Lewis. Both of you do. The footsteps retreated, and Uncle Elliot returned to my bedside. They're gone. And they won't be back. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I drifted off, I saw Stacy's face twisted with malice as her foot connected with my belly. I heard George's deafening silence when I begged him to defend me. I felt the moment my fairy tale marriage revealed itself to be built on lies and betrayal. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. A text from my sister, Gina, on my way. Flight lands in 3 hours. Don't make any decisions until I get there, Gina. My fierce, brilliant older sister. She'd warned me about marrying too young, never quite trusted George's smooth charm. She was a corporate lawyer in Chicago, known for her ruthless negotiation skills, her ability to destroy opponents with surgical precision. If I needed anyone in my corner right now, it was her. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical consultations, legal paperwork, and whispered conversations with Uncle Elliot about next steps, about protecting our interests. When Gina finally burst through my door at 11 p.m., her red hair wild from running through the airport, I nearly broke down completely. "Oh, sweetie," she said, gathering me carefully into her arms. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Have you seen her?" I asked, my voice thin. "Mabel? First thing when I got here. She's beautiful. Tiny, but perfect. She has your chin and your stubborn streak, I can already tell." We sat in silence for a moment, sisters who'd weathered countless storms together. Gina had been my maid of honor at my wedding to George. Despite her reservations, she'd held my hand through both miscarriages, flying out from Chicago at a moment's notice. And now she was here again, in my darkest hour. "Tell me everything," she said finally, her voice steel. "And don't leave anything out." So I did. Every humiliating detail. Every cruel word. Every moment of George's betrayal and Stacy's sickening violence. Gina listened without interrupting, her green eyes growing harder, colder, with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, they have no idea what they've done, do they? What do you mean? Gina's smile was sharp as a blade. Sweetie, they assaulted you in front of witnesses, at Uncle Elliot's hospital, while you were pregnant. Do you understand what that means, legally speaking? It means we're going to destroy them. Professionally. Financially. Personally. By the time we're done, Stacy Ryder will wish she'd never heard your name. And George will realize that betraying a woman like you was the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. Gina, I just want, you want what? To forgive them. To work it out for the sake of the baby. She leaned forward, her voice intense, grabbing my hands. Vi, listen to me. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And some people deserve to face the consequences of their actions. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. I'm calling Melinda Florence. She's the best divorce attorney on the East Coast, and she owes me a favor. We're going to make sure you and Mabel are protected and provided for. I don't know if I'm ready for this. You don't have to be ready. That's what family is for. Gina squeezed my hand. You focus on healing and taking care of that beautiful baby girl. Let me handle the rest. Over the next week, as Mabel grew stronger in the NICU and I recovered from the emergency delivery, Gina orchestrated what she called Operation Justice. Mrs. Florence, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in court, came to see me in the hospital. I've reviewed the initial police report, she said, settling into the visitor's chair with her briefcase. Miss Ryder has been charged with assault and battery. Given that you were pregnant at the time, the charges carry enhanced penalties. And George, your husband's situation is more complex. He wasn't the one who physically assaulted you, but he's certainly not innocent. We will be pursuing adultery, abandonment, and emotional distress claims in the divorce proceedings. Mrs. Florence opened her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. I need you to understand something, Mrs. Lewis. This case is going to attract attention. Hospital assault, premature birth, adultery. The media will be interested. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I thought about Mabel, fighting for every tiny breath in her incubator. I thought about George's hands on another woman's body. I thought about Stacy's foot connecting with my pregnant belly. Let them look, I said, my voice clear. I have nothing to hide. Mrs. Florence smiled, and I understood why Gina had called her the best. Then let's begin. 3 weeks after Mabel's birth, I was finally able to bring her home. Our house in the suburbs. The same house where George and I had planned our future, where we'd painted the nursery pale yellow because we wanted to be surprised by the baby's gender. Now, it felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. Gina had taken a leave of absence from her job in Chicago to help me navigate the legal proceedings and early motherhood. She'd moved into the guest room temporarily, filling the house with her fierce energy and protective presence. Without her, I would have drowned in the paperwork, the sleepless nights with a premature baby, and the crushing weight of my shattered marriage. George has been calling, she told me one morning as I fed Mabel her bottle. 15 times yesterday. Uncle Elliot had to threaten him with a restraining order. What does he want? To see the baby. To explain himself. To beg for forgiveness. Apparently. Gina's tone was flat, unimpressed. Mrs. Florence says we should document every attempt at contact. It'll help with the custody arrangements. Custody. The word made my stomach clench. The thought of sharing Mabel with George, of her spending weekends with him and potentially with Stacy, was unbearable. He won't get unsupervised visitation, Gina continued, reading my expression. Not after what happened. Mrs. Florence is confident about that. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Another text from an unknown number, but I recognized George's desperate tone. Please. I deleted the message without responding, just like I'd done with the previous 27. The preliminary hearing for Stacy's assault charges is next week, Mrs. Florence had told me during our last meeting. Are you prepared to testify? I was more than prepared. I wanted to look that woman in the eye and tell the world exactly what she'd done. But as the days passed, I began to realize that there were layers to this betrayal I hadn't even begun to uncover. It started with the insurance papers. Gina was helping me organize the mountain of medical bills from Mabel's NICU stay when she found it, the life insurance policy George had taken out on me 6 months ago. A $2 million policy. I'd never known about it. Vi, did you know about this? Gina's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the concern, the dawning horror in her eyes. No, why would he? The implications hit me like a physical blow. When did you say he took this out? March 15th. Right around the time his affair with Stacy started, according to the hospital records Uncle Elliot pulled. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, Mabel sleeping peacefully in her carrier between us. The policy felt heavy in my hands, like evidence of something darker than simple adultery. People take out life insurance all the time, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain, even to me. Especially when they're expecting a baby. $2 million, Vi, on a psychology student with no significant income, and he never told you about it. Gina was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling Mrs. Florence. And we need to talk to Uncle Elliot about George's access to medical records and medications. The thought that had been forming in the back of my mind was too terrible to voice. But Gina, ever practical, ever sharp, beat me to it. She said quietly, when George said he was in surgery, but was really with Stacy, what did you eat that day? Drink? Did George bring you anything? My hands began to shake as I remembered. He'd made me tea. Said it would help with the Braxton Hicks contractions. Some herbal blend he'd gotten from the hospital pharmacy. And you went into false labor an hour later. We looked at each other, both afraid to say what we were thinking, but the pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. He's a doctor, Gina said slowly. He has access to medications that could induce contractions. Medications that would be difficult to detect in routine blood work. But why? Why would he want me to go into early labor? Because premature babies don't always survive, Vi. And grieving widowers get a lot of sympathy. And $2 million. The room seemed to tilt around me. I thought about all the times over the past few months that George had brought me special drinks, vitamins he said were good for the baby, herbal teas to help with morning sickness. I thought about how attentive he'd been, how concerned about every little symptom. We need evidence, I whispered. We'll get it. Mrs. Florence has contacts at the FDA, people who can test for trace amounts of drugs. We'll check everything. The tea, the vitamins, anything he gave you. But Gina, if this is true, if George really tried to, I couldn't finish the sentence. Then he's not just an adulterous bastard, she finished for me. He's an attempted murderer. The next few days passed in a haze of secret investigations and hushed phone calls. Mrs. Florence worked her contacts while Uncle Elliot quietly pulled George's prescription records and pharmacy access logs. Gina installed security cameras around the house and changed all the locks. Just as a precaution, she'd said. But I saw how she checked the windows twice before going to bed each night. The results came back on a Thursday morning. Mrs. Florence called while I was giving Mabel her morning bottle, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. We found traces of misoprostol in the herbal tea, she said without preamble. It's a medication used to induce labor, among other things. The levels were subtle, not enough to guarantee a miscarriage, but certainly enough to trigger contractions in a woman already at risk for preterm labor. My legs gave out and I had to sit down heavily on the kitchen chair. So, he really tried to, he tried to kill you and the baby. Yes. For the insurance money and his freedom to be with Miss Ryder. What happens now? Now, we take this information to the district attorney. George Lewis is going to be facing charges for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. And Miss Ryder was likely complicit. She knew about the insurance policy, according to the emails we've uncovered. Mrs. Florence paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentler. Violet, I need you to understand something. This case is going to get national attention. The media will be fascinated by a story involving a doctor, his pregnant wife, attempted murder for insurance money, and a violent mistress. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I looked down at Mabel, who was watching me with those serious, dark eyes that seemed too wise for a newborn. She'd survived her father's attempt to kill her before she was even born. She'd fought her way into the world despite being born 8 weeks early. She was a survivor, just like her mother. Let them come, I said. The whole world can know what kind of man George Lewis really is. But I had no idea that the story was about to take an even darker turn. The arraignment was scheduled for a crisp October morning, exactly 6 weeks after Mabel's dramatic entrance into the world. George appeared in court wearing an expensive suit and a face full of righteous indignation, flanked by 2 high-priced attorneys I recognized from billboards around the city. I sat in the front row with Mrs. Florence, Gina on my other side, and Uncle Elliot behind us for moral support. Mabel was at home with the nanny Gina had insisted we hire, a former military police officer named Rosa who took no chances with security. Dr. George Lewis, the judge intoned, you are charged with attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and adultery. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. George's voice was steady, confident even. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, there was no remorse there. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Only cold calculation. Stacy's arraignment followed immediately. She'd been released on bail after her initial arrest for assault, but the new charges, conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder, had landed her back in custody. She looked terrible, her usually perfect hair limp and unwashed, her face pale and drawn. Miss Stacy Ryder, how do you plead to the charges of conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to attempted murder, and assault and battery? Not guilty. Her voice was barely a whisper. As we filed out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us like angry bees. Microphones thrust toward my face, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. Mrs. Lewis, how do you feel about your husband's arrest? Do you believe Dr. Lewis tried to kill you for insurance money? What's your response to allegations that this is all a vindictive plot by your uncle? Mrs. Florence guided me through the crowd with practiced efficiency, her hand firm on my elbow. No comment, she repeated to every question. Mrs. Lewis will make a statement at the appropriate time. But as we reached the car, I stopped. Something inside me, the same fierce instinct that had kept me going through the darkest nights with Mabel, demanded to be heard. I have something to say, I told Mrs. Florence. She looked concerned. Violet, we discussed this. It's better to, no, I turned to face the crowd of reporters, my spine straight, my voice clear and unwavering. George Lewis tried to murder me and our unborn daughter for insurance money so he could start a new life with his mistress. When their plan failed, Stacy Ryder physically assaulted me in an attempt to complete what the drugs couldn't accomplish. The crowd fell silent, cameras clicking furiously. My daughter survived because she's a fighter. I survived because I have family who love and protect me. And now, George and Stacy are going to face the consequences of their actions in a court of law, where the truth will be revealed for everyone to see. I paused, looking directly into the nearest camera. To any woman who has been betrayed, who's been made to feel worthless or disposable, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve justice. The ride home was quiet. Gina squeezed my hand in the back seat while Mrs. Florence fielded phone calls from reporters and legal colleagues. When we pulled into the driveway, Rosa met us at the door with Mabel in her arms. "All quiet here," she reported in her clipped, professional tone. "Though there have been several attempts to deliver flowers and gifts. I've documented everything and stored it in the garage for security screening." That evening, as I fed Mabel her bottle and watched the news coverage of the arraignment, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Hello? Is this Violet Lewis?" The voice was female, nervous, with a slight southern accent. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I used to work at Metropolitan General. I saw the news about your husband, and I think I have information you need to hear." My pulse quickened. "What kind of? What happened to Dr. Beckham?" Dr. Beckham. The physician who delivered Mabel, who'd been so kind and competent during those terrifying hours in the emergency delivery room. I'd heard through Uncle Elliot that she'd left the hospital suddenly, taking a position in another state. "Can you meet me somewhere?" Sarah asked. "Somewhere private. I'm afraid to talk about this over the phone." We arranged to meet the next morning at a coffee shop across town. I brought Gina with me for backup, leaving Mabel with Rosa and strict instructions to call if anything seemed amiss. Sarah Chen turned out to be a petite woman in her 30s with worried eyes and nervous hands that shook as she lifted her coffee cup. She'd been a surgical technician at Metropolitan General for 5 years before abruptly quitting 3 weeks ago. "I need to tell someone," she said without preamble. "I can't sleep knowing what I know and not doing anything about it." "What do you know about Stacy?" I asked gently. "She's done this before." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not the exact same thing, but targeting women, breaking up relationships, manipulating situations for her own benefit." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "There was another woman, Dr. Beckham. She was married. Had 2 young kids. Stacy went after her husband. He was a pharmaceutical sales rep who visited the hospital regularly." My blood ran cold. "What happened?" "Stacy seduced him, just like she did with your husband. But when Dr. Beckham found out and confronted them, Stacy claimed that Dr. Beckham had been stealing medications from the pharmacy. She planted evidence, manipulated records, made it look like Dr. Beckham was selling drugs to feed a gambling addiction." Gina leaned forward, her lawyer instincts fully engaged. "Do you have proof of this?" Sarah nodded, sliding the folder across the table. "I was working inventory that night when Stacy asked me to help her with some discrepancies in the medication logs. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Supervisors asking for help with paperwork wasn't unusual. But she had me sign off on forms that showed medications missing from Dr. Beckham's shifts." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photocopies of inventory sheets, medication logs, and what appeared to be surveillance footage stills showing Stacy in the pharmacy after hours. "Dr. Beckham lost her medical license," Sarah continued. "Her husband divorced her, got custody of the kids. She lost everything. And Stacy got promoted to nursing supervisor shortly after." "Why didn't you say anything before?" Gina asked, though her tone was understanding rather than accusatory. "I was scared. Stacy had friends in administration, people who protected her. And I needed my job." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But when I saw what happened to you, Mrs. Lewis, when I realized she'd actually physically attacked a pregnant woman, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I thought about Dr. Beckham, the kind woman who'd helped bring Mabel safely into the world despite the chaos and trauma. She'd been another victim of Stacy's manipulation. Another life destroyed by that woman's ambition and cruelty." "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "I think Stacy was planning to frame you, too." "What do you mean?" "She'd been asking questions about you for months. About your family background, your uncle's position at the hospital, your financial situation. She was particularly interested in your prescription for anxiety medication, the one you stopped taking when you got pregnant. The prenatal vitamins. The anxiety medication. I'd stopped taking it as soon as I found out I was expecting. George had been so supportive, so understanding about my decision to manage my pregnancy anxiety naturally with therapy instead of medication. She wanted to make it look like you had a history of drug problems, Sarah explained. Like maybe you'd been taking unprescribed medications, mixing things that could harm the baby. If the misoprostol had worked, if you'd lost the baby, she was planning to suggest that you'd been self-medicating and accidentally caused the miscarriage. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could barely breathe as the full scope of Stacy's manipulation became clear. She hadn't just stolen my husband. She'd planned to destroy my reputation, my credibility, maybe even my freedom, if anything had happened to Mabel. Will you testify? Gina asked Sarah. Will you tell all of this to the prosecutors? Sarah nodded, though her hands were still shaking. That's why I called. I can't let her hurt anyone else. We spent another hour going through the documentation Sarah had brought, her detailed account of Stacy's pattern of manipulation and destruction. By the time we left the coffee shop, I had a much clearer picture of who we were really dealing with. Stacy Ryder wasn't just a homewrecker or even a violent woman acting in the heat of the moment. She was a calculating predator who systematically targeted vulnerable people and destroyed their lives for personal gain. But she'd made one critical mistake: she'd underestimated me. That afternoon, Mrs. Florence called with news that felt like vindication. The prosecutor is adding additional charges based on the new evidence. Pattern of criminal behavior, evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud. And we've located Dr. Beckham. She's agreed to testify about what Stacy did to her. What about George? His attorneys are trying to negotiate a plea deal. They're claiming he was manipulated by Miss Ryder, that he was just as much a victim as you were. The audacity of that defense made my blood boil. He tried to kill me, Melinda. He tried to kill our daughter. I know. And we're not accepting any plea that doesn't include significant prison time. The evidence is too strong. The charges are too serious. But even as we planned our legal strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Stacy had been too confident during her arraignment, too composed for someone facing decades in prison. George's expensive lawyer suggested resources I didn't know he had. It wasn't until Rosa came to me with a concerned expression and a manila envelope that I began to understand the final piece of the puzzle. This came by courier an hour ago, she said, handing me the envelope. No return address, but it passed all the security screenings. Inside was a single photograph and a typed note. The photo showed George and Stacy in what looked like a hotel room, but they weren't alone. There was a third person in the image, a man I recognized from news reports as Vincent Caruso, a known associate of organized crime families in the area. The note was brief: your husband owes people money. A lot of money. The insurance policy wasn't just about starting a new life. It was about staying alive. Thought you should know, a friend, I stared at the photograph. Pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. George's expensive lawyers. Stacy's confidence. The elaborate nature of their plan. It all made sense if they'd been working with people who had experience in making problems disappear permanently. Gina. I called, my voice barely steady. We need to call Mrs. Florence. Now. What is it? I handed her the photograph and note. Her face went white as she processed the implications. Oh, Vi. This isn't just about adultery and insurance fraud anymore. No, I said, looking down at Mabel, sleeping peacefully in her carrier. It's about organized crime. Money laundering. And people who kill for a living. The game had just changed completely. But I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who'd walked into her husband's office with a turkey sandwich 6 weeks ago. I was a mother now, with everything to fight for and nothing left to lose. And I was about to show George, Stacy, and their criminal associates exactly what happened when they threatened my family. The revelation about George's connection to Vincent Caruso sent shock waves through our legal team. Mrs. Florence immediately contacted the FBI, who confirmed what we'd suspected. George had been laundering money through fake medical equipment purchases for the past 18 months, skimming from the hospital's accounts to pay gambling debts to Caruso's organization. The insurance money wasn't just about starting fresh with Stacy, Agent Rebecca Santos explained during a meeting at Mrs. Florence's office. Your husband owed Caruso's people nearly $3 million. The life insurance payout would have cleared his debts and bought his freedom. And when the misoprostol didn't work? I asked. They moved to Plan B. Stacy's assault was meant to finish what the drug started. If you'd lost the baby and died from complications, it would have looked like a tragic accident following a domestic dispute. The coldness of it, the calculated nature of their plan to murder me and my unborn child, should have destroyed me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve into something harder than diamond. What do you need from me? I asked. Agent Santos smiled grimly. We need you to help us catch them all. The plan was audacious and dangerous. I would wear a wire and meet with George, ostensibly to discuss custody arrangements for Mabel. The meeting would take place at our old house, the one I'd moved out of after discovering the extent of his betrayal, under the pretext of collecting more of my belongings. He'll try to manipulate you, Agent Santos warned. He'll apologize, claim he was coerced, promise to change. Don't believe any of it. And whatever you do, don't let him know that we're aware of the Caruso connection. What if he gets suspicious? What if he realizes I'm working with the FBI? Then you get out immediately. We'll have agents positioned around the house, but your safety is the priority. Gina was adamantly against the plan. It's too risky, she argued as we sat in my new apartment, a secure building with a doorman and security cameras that Rosa had helped me find. What if something goes wrong? What if George realizes you're wearing a wire? Then we lose the chance to get evidence against Caruso's people, I replied. Gina, they tried to kill me and Mabel. If we don't stop them now, they'll try again. Or they'll find other victims. I looked down at my daughter, now 3 months old and thriving despite her premature start. She'd gained weight. Her cheeks had filled out, and she'd started smiling. Real smiles that lit up her entire face. I would do anything to protect her future. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. George had agreed eagerly when I'd called, his voice full of hope and gratitude that I was finally ready to talk. His optimism would have been pathetic if it wasn't so dangerous. I spent the weekend preparing, working with Agent Santos and her team to anticipate every possible scenario. The wire was nearly invisible, a small device that transmitted to receivers positioned around the house. If anything went wrong, help would be there in seconds. Remember, Mrs. Florence said on Monday night, you're not just gathering evidence for the criminal case. Anything George says can be used in the custody proceedings, too. Let him talk. Let him reveal who he really is. Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood. As I drove to the house where I'd once planned to raise my children and grow old with my husband, the familiar sight of the white picket fence and red brick facade sent a pang through my chest. Not for what was, but for what I thought was real. George was waiting in the kitchen, and I was struck by how different he looked. He'd lost weight. His face was haggard, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But when he saw me, his expression brightened with desperate hope. Violet, thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance. This isn't about second chances, George, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. This is about Mabel. About what's best for her. Of course, of course. That's what matters most. He gestured toward the kitchen table, where he'd set out coffee and the pastries I used to love from the bakery downtown. Please, sit. We need to talk. I remained standing, my hand resting on the back of a chair. Talk about what? About how you tried to kill me for insurance money. About how your mistress attacked me while I was pregnant. About how you stood there and watched. His face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I never meant for any of that to happen, he said, his voice breaking. You have to believe me, Vi. I got in over my head with some bad people, and I made terrible choices, but I never wanted you to get hurt. Bad people? I kept my expression carefully neutral, not letting on that I knew about Caruso. George ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. I had some gambling problems, debts. I borrowed money from people I shouldn't have. And when I couldn't pay them back, they threatened you. They threatened all of us. You, me, the baby. I was trying to protect our family, Violet. The insurance policy, the other things, it was all about getting enough money to pay them off and disappear somewhere safe. The lies came so smoothly, with such apparent sincerity, that I could see how he'd manipulated me for years. But now I recognized the pattern, the way he positioned himself as the victim, the way he made his betrayal sound like sacrifice. So you decided to murder me instead? No. God, no. That was never the plan. He moved closer, his eyes pleading. The medication was just supposed to induce early labor. Premature babies have complications sometimes. Insurance companies don't ask as many questions when there are natural medical issues involved. My blood turned to ice. He was admitting it. Casually discussing his plan to kill our daughter as if it were a reasonable business decision. And if I died too, from the complications? George's silence was answer enough. What about Stacy? I asked. Was seducing her part of your master plan too? For the first time, his mask slipped completely. His face hardened, and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes that I'd never noticed before, or had willfully ignored. Stacy was a mistake, he said flatly. A weakness I shouldn't have indulged. But she became useful. She had access to medical records, prescription logs. She knew how to manipulate the system. Useful enough to help you frame Dr. Beckham. His head snapped up, surprise flashing across his face. How do you know about? I know a lot of things, George. Like how you've been laundering money through fake equipment purchases. Like how Vincent Caruso owns $3 million of your soul. The color drained from his face completely. Violet, you don't understand these people. If they find out, you know, they'll, what? Try to kill me. Been there, done that, survived it. George moved toward the phone on the counter, but I was faster. Don't even think about it, I said, positioning myself between him and any potential escape route. You're wearing a wire, he said. The words came out flat and defeated. This whole thing is a setup. Just like your marriage to me was a setup. Just like your concern for our family was a setup. His expression shifted again. And now I saw the man he really was, desperate, cornered, and dangerous. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly. Caruso doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. If you think you've won something here, you're more naive than I thought. Maybe. But at least I'm not a murderer. That's when he lunged at me. George was bigger and stronger, but I'd spent the last 3 months in self-defense classes that Rosa had insisted on. More importantly, I was fighting for my daughter's future, while he was fighting to save his own miserable skin. I dodged his grab and brought my knee up hard into his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping, the front door burst open and FBI agents flooded the room. FBI. Hands where we can see them. George was on the ground, cuffed and read his rights within 30 seconds. Agent Santos approached me with concern in her eyes. "Are you hurt? Did he say anything useful before he figured out the wire?" "Everything we need," I replied, pulling the recording device from my jacket, including admissions about the insurance fraud, the medication, and his connections to Vincent Caruso. As they led George away, he turned back to look at me one last time. "This isn't over, Violet," he said quietly. "It's never going to be over." But he was wrong. It was about to be very, very over. The trials of George Lewis and Stacy Ryder became the most talked about criminal cases in the state that year. Media outlets dubbed it the hospital betrayal case, and court TV covered every day of testimony. I'd become something I never wanted to be, a public figure, a symbol of betrayal survived and justice sought. But I'd also become something I'd always had the potential to be, a woman who refused to be a victim. George's trial came first. The evidence was overwhelming: the recorded conversation where he'd admitted to the insurance fraud and attempted murder, the medical records showing his access to the drugs found in my system, financial documents linking him to Vincent Caruso's money laundering operation. His defense team tried everything. They claimed he'd been coerced by organized crime figures. They suggested I'd manipulated the evidence with help from my uncle's position at the hospital. They even tried to argue that George had been protecting me by planning my death, since Caruso would have killed our entire family if the debts weren't paid. None of it worked. Dr. Beckham testified about how Stacy had systematically destroyed her career and family. Sarah Chen provided detailed evidence of Stacy's pattern of manipulation and fraud. Uncle Elliot took the stand to describe finding me on the floor of George's office, Stacy standing over me with malicious satisfaction. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Vincent Caruso himself. The FBI had arrested Caruso and several of his associates based on the evidence gathered from George's wire recordings. Facing decades in federal prison, Caruso decided to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Dr. Caruso seemed nothing like the dangerous criminal I'd imagined. He seemed almost ordinary, a balding, middle-aged man in an expensive suit. He owed us money from sports betting. Kept promising he could pay, but never delivered. Finally, he came to us with this scheme about insurance fraud. "Did you encourage Dr. Lewis to harm his wife?" the prosecutor asked. "We told him to handle his business however he wanted, as long as we got our money. If his wife had to die for that to happen, that was his choice to make." The casual way he discussed my potential murder sent chills through the courtroom, but it also sealed George's fate. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 35 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, George looked at me one final time. There was no apology in his eyes, no remorse, only bitter resentment that his plan had failed. Stacy's trial was shorter, but no less satisfying. In addition to her assault on me, she faced charges related to the Dr. Beckham frame-up and her role in George's insurance fraud conspiracy. She took the stand in her own defense, a decision her lawyers clearly regretted. Stacy tried to portray herself as another victim of George's manipulation, a woman seduced by a charming doctor who'd promised her the world. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "George told me that Violet was planning to leave him, that she'd been having affairs. He said she was going to take everything in the divorce and disappear with the baby." "So, you decided to push her down and kick her in the stomach?" the prosecutor asked dryly. I was angry. I thought she was going to destroy the man I loved. I wasn't thinking clearly. Were you thinking clearly when you planted evidence to destroy Dr. Beckham's career? That was George's idea. He said she was stealing medications, that someone needed to report her before patients got hurt. Lie after lie, excuse after excuse, but the evidence was clear, and the jury saw through her performance easily. They convicted her on all counts, and the judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison, 10 for the assault on me, and 5 for her role in the conspiracy against Dr. Beckham. Miss Ryder, the judge said before imposing sentence, you have shown a pattern of calculated cruelty and manipulation that demonstrates a complete lack of remorse or empathy. You attacked a pregnant woman with the intent to harm both her and her unborn child. You destroyed an innocent doctor's career and family for personal gain. This court can find no mitigating factors that would justify leniency. As they led Stacy away, she turned to look at me with pure hatred. This isn't justice, she spat. This is revenge. Sometimes, I said quietly, knowing she could hear me, they're the same thing. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the university's largest lecture hall, looking out at a sea of eager faces. My doctoral dissertation on trauma recovery and post-traumatic growth in victims of intimate partner violence had been accepted with highest honors. And I'd been offered a position as assistant professor of psychology, with a specialization in victim advocacy. Survival, I told my students, isn't just about getting through the crisis. It's about using that experience to build something stronger, something better than what existed before. In the front row, Gina beamed with pride while Uncle Elliot held 2-year-old Mabel on his lap. My daughter had grown into a fierce, determined toddler with her father's dark eyes, but none of his capacity for deception. She'd inherited my stubborn streak and her aunt's sharp intelligence. After class, we walked to the campus coffee shop where Dr. Beckham was waiting for us. She'd successfully appealed the decision that had cost her medical license. And after a lengthy legal battle, she'd been reinstated and offered a position at Uncle Elliot's hospital. Her children, now teenagers, had come to live with her again after their father's arrest for embezzlement, a crime he'd committed trying to pay for his expensive lawyers during the custody battle. How does it feel? Dr. Beckham asked as we settled at our usual table. Like justice, I replied honestly. Like the world makes sense again. George was serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary, where his medical training made him valuable enough to keep safe from other inmates. He'd be eligible for parole when Mabel turned 27, assuming he lived that long. Vincent Caruso had received 12 years in exchange for his cooperation, and several of his associates had received longer sentences. Stacy had tried to appeal her conviction twice, claiming ineffective assistance of counsel and judicial bias. Both appeals had been denied. She'd be in prison until Mabel graduated from high school. Mrs. Florence had helped me secure a settlement from the hospital's insurance company for their failure to properly screen and supervise Stacy. The money had paid for my legal fees, my education, and a trust fund for Mabel's future. More importantly, it had funded a victim advocacy program at the hospital that provided support and legal resources for other women facing domestic violence. Any word from George? Gina asked, bouncing Mabel on her knee. He's still writing letters, I said. The prison forwards them to Mrs. Florence, who files them without me reading them. I don't need his apologies or explanations anymore. Good, Uncle Elliot said firmly. Some bridges are better left burned. As we sat there, sharing coffee and watching Mabel play with her toy medical kit, she declared she wanted to be a baby doctor, like Uncle Elliot. I reflected on how much had changed. I'd lost a marriage, but I'd gained my strength. I'd lost my naive trust in people, but I'd gained the ability to see clearly through deception. I'd lost the woman I used to be. But I'd become someone much more powerful. The little silver locket around Mabel's neck caught the afternoon light. Inside was a photo of the two of us on the day she came home from the NICU. Both of U.S. survivors of an attempt to destroy us before we'd even had a chance to fight back. That photograph had been the final piece of evidence that sealed George and Stacy's fate. Proof that despite their best efforts to eliminate us, we had not only survived but thrived. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rosa, now permanently employed as head of security for my small but growing practice. * New client wants to schedule consultation. Says she heard your interview on NPR and needs help dealing with domestic violence situation. Interested? I looked at my daughter, my sister, my uncle, and my friend. I looked at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. I thought about the woman who'd called Rosa, desperate for help and hope. "Tell her I'll see her tomorrow," I texted back. Because this was what I'd learned: the best revenge isn't just surviving what someone tried to do to you. The best revenge is using that survival to build something beautiful, something that helps other people survive, too. The best revenge is a life well lived with the people who deserve your love and trust. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply being strong enough to help the next victim become a survivor. As we walked across campus in the golden afternoon light, Mabel babbling happily about her toy stethoscope, I realized that George and Stacy had given me something they'd never intended to give: the absolute certainty that I was capable of anything. They'd tried to destroy me. And instead, they'd made me unbreakable. That was a gift I'd carry forever and use to help others find their own strength. The nightmare was over. The rest of my life was just beginning, and it was going to be extraordinary. Have you ever faced a moment in your life where something so terrible happened, yet it ultimately made you stronger? Or what do you think, is justice truly just another word for revenge sometimes? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and take care.